There is a specific kind of cruelty that hides behind a smile. It does not leave bruises. It does not raise its voice. It just calls you by the wrong name over and over and over again until you start to wonder if maybe you are the problem. My mother-in-law did that to me for an entire year. And the worst part? She did it so smoothly, so casually, that half the family never even noticed. I noticed every single time, and I want you to stay with me through this story, because what happened on Thanksgiving Day that year was not something I planned in a moment of rage. It was something I built quietly, patiently, over months of being underestimated. And when the moment finally came, I did not have to raise my voice either. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was when I married into that family. I was 29 years old, newly married to a man I genuinely loved, and I was trying so hard. I brought casseroles to family dinners nobody asked for. I remembered birthdays. I sent thank you cards after every holiday. I was the kind of daughter-in-law that most mothers would have been grateful for. But my mother-in-law, Diane, was not most mothers. From the very first family gathering after our wedding, something felt off with her. She was polite on the surface, always smiling, always well-dressed, always the center of the room. But there was a sharpness underneath it, like a blade wrapped in a silk cloth, and she aimed that blade at me in the subtlest way imaginable. She started calling me Janet. Now, my name is not Janet. My name is Claire. It has always been Claire. It is a simple, one-syllable name that is not remotely close to Janet. And Janet, as I would come to learn, was the name of my husband Marcus's college girlfriend, the one his mother had apparently adored. The one she had, according to Marcus's sister, fully expected him to marry. The first time Diane called me Janet, I genuinely thought it was a mistake. We were at her kitchen table about 3 months after the wedding, and she looked right at me and said, "Janet, would you pass the bread?" I blinked. I looked around. I passed the bread. Marcus caught my eye from across the table and gave me this tiny apologetic wince, but he said nothing. I told myself it was an honest slip. An older woman, lots of names to keep track of. Except it kept happening. Every single time I saw her. "Janet, do you want more coffee? Janet, how is work going? Oh, Janet, you look tired." Month after month, gathering after gathering. And here is the thing that made it so insidious. She never corrected herself. When I gently said, "Actually, it is Claire," she would laugh lightly and wave her hand and say something like, of course, silly me," and then 3 minutes later she would do it again. It was never an accident. And slowly, I think the family started to know it too, even if they did not say anything out loud. I want to pause here and tell you what that does to a person, because I think it is important. Being repeatedly called by someone else's name, by a person who absolutely knows better, is a form of erasure. It is someone looking at you and saying, without ever saying it directly, you do not matter enough to be who you actually are. You are a replacement, a lesser version of the person I actually wanted here. It chips away at you in ways that are hard to explain to someone who has not experienced it. I started dreading family events. I started second-guessing myself. I started wondering if Marcus secretly agreed with his mother, if somewhere deep down he wished I was Janet too. And Marcus, bless his heart, was not helping. Every time I brought it up, he would sigh and say his mother did not mean anything by it, that she was just old-fashioned and forgetful, that I should not let it get to me. He was not malicious. He was conflict avoidant in the way that a lot of people are when it comes to their own parents. He loved me, I believe that. But he was not ready to go to war over a name, and so I was on my own. By the time autumn rolled around, I had been Mrs. Claire Harmon for 11 months, and I had been called Janet approximately 47 times. I know that number because I had started keeping a small note in my phone. Not out of obsession, but out of self-preservation. When you are being gaslit, receipts are sanity. I wanted to be able to look at something concrete when my own memories started to feel unreliable. And then came the Sunday dinner in early October, the one where Diane announced that Thanksgiving was going to be at her house that year, as it always was, and that she expected everyone to bring a dish. She went around the table assigning things. Marcus's brother got the mashed potatoes. His sister got the green bean casserole. His aunt got the pies. And then Diane looked across the table at me with that silk-wrapped smile and said, in front of everyone, "Why don't we let Janet make the turkey this year?" The table went quiet for just a half second, not long enough for most people to register it as meaningful. I felt the weight of every single one of those 47 times, sitting right there in that pause. And I watched her face. She was not confused. She was not apologetic. She was watching me, waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see if I would correct her again, so she could do her little laugh and her little wave and make me look like the oversensitive one. Or waiting to see if I would just absorb it again, quietly, the way I always had. I did neither. I looked her right in the eyes and I said, "Sure, Janet will take care of the turkey. Now I need you to understand what I had just done, because it might not be obvious yet. I had just agreed, on behalf of Janet, to bring the centerpiece of Thanksgiving dinner, the main course, the thing that the entire meal is built around. And I had done it using the name she had given me, without flinching, without correcting her, without giving her any reaction at all." And then she smiled back and moved on. But I had already made my decision. The weeks between that October dinner and Thanksgiving gave me a lot of time to think. And what I kept coming back to was this. I had spent almost a year trying to correct Diane, trying to make her see me, trying to be gracious and patient and diplomatic. None of it had worked. She had continued to call me Janet because there had been no real consequence for doing so. Every time I corrected her and she laughed it off, she won. Every time Marcus shrugged and told me to let it go, she won. The only way to change the dynamic was to stop playing the game by her rules. So I started thinking about what Diane actually valued, and the answer was clear. She valued her image. She valued being the matriarch of a warm, functional, impressive family. She valued Thanksgiving specifically because it was her stage. She cooked for weeks in advance. She set the table with her grandmother's china. She lit candles and played soft music and positioned herself as the woman who held everything together. That dinner was her performance. And the family was her audience. The turkey was the centerpiece of that performance, and Janet apparently was bringing it. I did not buy a turkey. I want to be completely clear about that. I thought about it. I went back and forth. Part of me worried I was going too far, that I would blow up the whole family, that Marcus would never forgive me. But then I would open my phone and scroll through those 47 entries, and I would remember standing at that October table while she looked at me like I was nothing, and the resolve would come back, steady and quiet. I did not buy a turkey. I did not tell Marcus what I was planning. I did not tell anyone. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright. I made a beautiful side dish, a roasted root vegetable medley with fresh herbs, something I had genuinely put effort into. I dressed nicely. Marcus asked me twice if I had the turkey in the car, and I said, both times, very evenly, "Janet is handling the turkey." He looked at me a little strangely but did not push it. We drove to Diane's house. The family gathered the way they always did, coats piling up on the guest bed, the smell of Diane's side dishes already filling the house, children running through the hallway. Everything looked exactly like every other Thanksgiving. Diane greeted us at the door, and when she saw me, she said, "Janet, so glad you made it. Did you bring the turkey?" I held up my roasted vegetables. I said, "I brought my dish." I assumed Janet was handling the turkey. The shift on her face was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It started as confusion, then a kind of recalculating. Then, slowly, the color began to rise in her cheeks as she understood what was happening. She looked at the dish in my hands. She looked at the door behind me. She looked at Marcus. And then she said with a little laugh that had lost all its smoothness, "Well, where is the turkey?" And I said, very gently, very clearly, "I genuinely do not know. I thought Janet was bringing it." The kitchen went quiet, and I mean the whole kitchen. Marcus's sister had been mid-sentence about something and just stopped. His brother looked up from the counter. His aunt turned from the stove, and Diane stood there in the middle of her beautiful Thanksgiving kitchen with her grandmother's china on the table and no turkey anywhere in the house, and for the first time in 11 months, she had absolutely nothing to hide behind. Marcus, to his credit, finally understood what was happening. I watched it move across his face in real time, the pieces connecting. He looked at me. He looked at his mother, and he said, quietly but clearly, Mom, her name is Claire. It has always been Claire? How many times has she had to tell you that? Diane tried to recover. She laughed again, that same light, dismissive laugh, and started to say something about honest mistakes and nobody being perfect. But Marcus's sister cut her off. She said, Mom, this has been going on for a year. I have heard you do it at literally every dinner. It is not a mistake. And then his brother said, yeah, I have noticed it too. And the aunt just looked at Diane with this long, measuring silence that said more than any words could. Diane's performance had no audience anymore. They were all watching her, and not in the way she wanted. Now, I want to be honest with you about what Thanksgiving actually looked like that day, because I think the reality is more interesting than a dramatic blow-up. Nobody screamed. Nobody threw anything. The family ordered Chinese takeout, which the kids thought was the best Thanksgiving ever, and the adults sat around Diane's beautifully set table eating dumplings off her grandmother's china. There was an uncomfortable undercurrent for most of the meal, but there was also, for the first time, an honesty in the room that had not been there before. Diane was subdued in a way I had never seen her. She did not call me Janet once for the rest of the day. She actually called me Claire, twice, both times, in a voice that was careful and deliberate, like she was testing out a word in a foreign language. It was not a full transformation. I was not naive enough to think one afternoon had fixed everything, but something had shifted, and everyone in that room felt it. The days after Thanksgiving were complicated. Marcus and I had a long conversation, one of the most honest ones we had ever had, about his mother and about what I had been carrying for the past year. I showed him the note on my phone, the 47 entries. He sat with that for a while without saying anything. And then he said, I should have said something a long time ago. I am sorry I did not. That apology mattered to me. Not because it fixed the past, but because it told me he was finally willing to see it clearly. He called his mother the following week and had a direct conversation with her that I was not part of. I do not know exactly what was said. What I do know is that at Christmas that year, Diane called me Claire, from the moment I walked in the door to the moment I left. She was not warm, exactly. Our relationship has never become what I once hoped it might be. But the erasure stopped. The game she had been playing stopped. Because she had learned, in front of her entire family, that I was not going to keep absorbing it quietly. I want to talk about something that I think gets lost in stories like this, something that took me a long time to understand about myself. For most of that year, I had been operating from a place of fear of being seen as difficult, fear of causing conflict in Marcus's family, fear that if I pushed back too hard, I would be the one who looked bad. And Diane had counted on that fear. People like her always do. They built their power on the assumption that you value the peace more than you value yourself. What changed for me was not a sudden burst of confidence. It was quieter than that. It was a slow, grinding realization that the peace I was protecting was not real peace. It was a performance of peace, held together by my willingness to keep shrinking. Real peace, the kind that actually sustains a family and a marriage, requires honesty. And sometimes honesty requires letting something fall apart so it can be rebuilt on a foundation that is actually solid. I did not ruin Thanksgiving. I want to say that clearly, because I know that is the story Diane told in the weeks afterward, that I had been petty and spiteful and had deliberately sabotaged the holiday. And maybe from the outside, a version of that story is understandable. But here is what I know. I had been repeatedly asking to be seen as myself for nearly a year, and it had been dismissed every single time. What I did on Thanksgiving was not sabotage. It was a mirror. I simply reflected back exactly what Diane had been doing to me, in a context where everyone could see it clearly. She called me Janet, so I let Janet handle the turkey. And Janet, as it turns out, did not show up, because Janet was never there. There is a version of this story where I stayed quiet forever, and the name thing just became part of the texture of that family. Something everyone knew about and nobody addressed. A small cruelty normalized into invisibility. I lived close to that version for almost a year, and I am genuinely grateful I did not stay in it. Because here is what I learned. Being underestimated is only a permanent condition if you accept the terms of the person doing the underestimating. Diane thought she knew exactly who I was. She thought I was someone who would swallow her contempt and smile and pass the bread and never, ever push back. She had built her whole dynamic with me on that assumption. And when I stopped confirming it, when I quietly, patiently waited for the moment where her own behavior would speak for itself, the entire structure she had built collapsed under its own weight. I did not need to argue. I did not need to make a speech. I did not need Marcus to ride in and defend me, though I am glad he finally did. I just needed to stop being who she had decided I was. If you are somewhere in the middle of a dynamic like this one, I want you to hear something. The person diminishing you is counting on your patience being infinite. They are counting on you caring more about the relationship than about yourself. And the way out is not always a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it is just the quiet, deliberate decision to stop carrying something that was never yours to carry. Diane's need to keep her son connected to a ghost of a relationship that ended years before I ever met him was never my burden. Her grief over a future she had imagined and lost was never my fault. And her choice to take that out on me by refusing to say my name was never something I deserved to absorb in silence. I have always been Claire, and on a cold Thanksgiving morning, in front of a table set with her grandmother's china and no turkey in sight, the rest of the family finally got to see that too. Marriage is hard. Families are complicated. And mother-in-law dynamics can be some of the most exhausting terrain a person navigates in their adult life, because the stakes are so high and the rules are so unclear. What I hope this story offers, if it offers anything at all, is a small reminder that you do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to blow everything up to make a point. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is simply hold still and let the truth do the work. And when Diane handed me the perfect opportunity to let her own behavior speak for itself, I took it. Not out of cruelty, not out of spite, but because I had spent a year being invisible in that family, and I was done. The Chinese takeout was actually really good, by the way. The kids still talk about the year Thanksgiving was dumplings. And every time someone brings it up, Diane gets very quiet, and I just smile, and Marcus squeezes my hand under the table. My name is Claire. And I have never forgotten that, not even for a single day. It just took one Thanksgiving for everyone